Well, good morning, everyone. It is June 16th, and we are excited to again have all of you, our faithful listeners, and those of you who download the podcast, and those of you who watch on our YouTube channel, Rethinking Freedom. I am Aya Fubara Eneli, your host, and welcome to yet another episode. This is episode 34. We are making lots of strides here. But welcome to another episode of Rethinking Freedom. And as you all know, this is not just a show. This is a place where we encourage one another to rethink what freedom means to us. And more importantly, what we are going to do to maintain or to establish, in some cases, the freedom that we say we want. And as many of you may know, have heard, the price for freedom is eternal vigilance. And so today I have with me two amazing guests. I'm still pinching myself that they said yes to come on to the show and to have this conversation. It is Juneteenth week, if you are not aware. And if you're not aware, wake up. Because here in Texas, I know I'm aware. People in my sphere are definitely aware. We want the entire nation to know what's going on. We know that Juneteenth is now a national holiday, and there have been lots of articles written about how it came about and perhaps why we should celebrate it. But it seems like many of us are just kind of taking it as a day off and not necessarily understanding the history behind it. So today I have with me Sam Collins III, and he's only going to be with us for a shorter period of time. And I also have with me Ed Cotham Jr. I'm going to introduce them each in a minute here. And at the end of my discussion with them, we'll also share a little bit about some of the Juneteenth events that are taking place here in the Killeen area, which is where I am based, so that for those of you who want to get engaged and want to learn more and want to meet up with people, you know what's available for you there. Or here. So Samuel Collins III is a seventh generation Texan, seventh generation with roots back to 1837. He graduated with a BBA in accounting from Texas A&M University in 1994. He has been a lifelong resident of Galveston County. He is married to his awesome, beautiful wife, Doris, who's also an educator. Shout out to educators, because it is not easy out in the streets right now. For educators. They have 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. In 2015, he was named Galveston County Citizen of the Year for his work in Galveston County and the preservation community on the local, state, and national levels. He currently serves as an advisor with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, representing Texas. Thank you, sir. He's actively involved in the national campaign to tell the full story, which he's going to share some of that with us today. He has spoken on programs for major universities and corporations, so look him up. The link to how you can reach him is in our YouTube description. But he has been, brought on by universities and corporations, including Texas A&M, Prairie View A&M, Harvard, Rice, Texas, Varsha College. We can go on. Boeing, Caterpillar, Wendy's, and so many more. And Mr. Sam Collins III, we welcome you to Rethinking Freedom.
Thank you for the warm invitation. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, sir. And to both of you and to all the fathers in the house, even though Father's Day is over, it's always Father's Day. I'm a daddy's girl, so happy Father's Day to y'all. Don't want to forget that, even though it's a day later. But thank you so much for what you do as fathers, as father figures in the community as well. And next we have Ed Cotham Jr. He's a retired chief investment officer of the Terry Foundation, the largest private scholarship provider at Texas universities. I need to have a separate conversation with him because my fourth child is going into college, but we'll have 3 in college at the same time. Sir, we need some help. College is expensive, and 3 at the same time is ridiculous. I don't know what I was thinking. He holds degrees in economics from the University of Houston and the University of Chicago, and a law degree from the University of Texas. I don't know if he's a recovering attorney. I'm also an attorney, and I'm telling you, law is exciting and, in my case, frustrating sometimes, all at the same time. A native Texan and leading Civil War historian, Ed is a life member of the Civil War Preservation Trust and has received numerous awards for battlefield preservation and historical writing. He's the author of several acclaimed books, including Battle on the Bay, Sabine Pass, the Confederacy's Thermopylae, the Southern Journey of a Civil War Marine, and most recently, Juneteenth, the story behind the celebration, which I have to tell you is an incredibly fascinating read. I stayed up all night. Once I got the book, I couldn't stop reading. I have notes all through the margins, questions and places I want to go read and visit and all of that. So thank you so much for that labor of love. His work has been featured on NPR and recognized nationally for its impact. And thank you so much, Ed, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump right into it. I'm going to start with you, Sam, since you have to leave a little earlier. Why are we even celebrating Juneteenth? We have July 4th and 1776 as our Independence Day. What is this thing that has led us to a national holiday, and why is it of any importance to people today?
Well, I often say that Juneteenth celebrates the evolution of our country to a more perfect union. So we were not perfect in 1776, 1619, or even 1528, almost 100 years before 1619. And we're still not perfect today. And when you mention that you have several children, I have 4 children. They all have different birthdays. The 3 oldest ones are March 14th, March 28th, and April 4th. I could try to have one birthday party, but they all want their own individual birthday parties. So when I look at the Juneteenth holiday, July 4th represents a freedom birthday for the country. June 19th represents a freedom birthday for the former enslaved. While there were many emancipation days all over the country, April 16th, 1862 in the Washington, D.C. area, May 20th in Florida, August 8th in Kentucky as just examples. In 1865, the May 20th and August 8th dates. So there were many emancipation days, but the former enslaved in Texas kept their oral history alive. As they migrated all over the country, they took those traditions with them, began having Juneteenth celebrations in other states. And being a native Texan, I just like to think we do everything bigger. So we took our story and made it bigger to the point that this Texas event became a national holiday and a worldwide celebration of freedom. This year, I had a Ghanaian citizen write an article that appeared in the Galveston County Daily News as an editorial of the many events that they're having in Accra, Ghana, to celebrate Juneteenth. So when you think about something that started right here in Texas, that became a national holiday, is now being celebrated around the world. And we could celebrate freedom from June 19th to July 4th. There's not a competition with the July 4th date. And I don't think it should be a competition with the other emancipation days either, because we could celebrate liberty and freedom 365 days a year. It just so happened that June 19th is now a national holiday. And on that day, we could talk about all of these emancipation days.
Thank you very much. Ed, what is your take on the relevance of Juneteenth and this celebration today? And I would say especially in light of our current political climate.
I think Sam put it very well. You could celebrate many different days for emancipation. There's no one natural day that stands out among any others. You could pick the day of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. You could pick the day the 13th Amendment was ratified in December of 1865. But for me, the reason I think that Juneteenth stands out in June of 1865 is that there were about 250,000 or more enslaved people in Texas that were liberated right around the date that the Juneteenth order was issued, and that was the last large intact body of enslaved people in the Confederacy that was liberated. And again, Texas was very unique in that, unlike other states, the number of enslaved people in Texas actually grew during the Civil War. It grew from 200,000 to more than 250,000 at the end of the war. And these folks were bottled up here in Texas. They didn't have easy access to the Underground Railroad the way that folks in other states did. If they wanted to get away, they had to go overland through a very grueling network to get to places like Mexico or to swim out to the Union Navy. They had a very difficult way to get away. So people here in Texas, when they finally got freedom at the end of the war, as Sam said, it really, really meant something to these folks. And they determined to celebrate that event, for the rest of their lives, to make sure that their descendants knew how much it meant to them, and that was preserved in the memory of people here in Texas forever.
And I'm going to come back to you on why there was such a growth in the quote unquote population of enslaved Africans in Texas, particularly once the war began. But before we get to that, Sam, I was surprised because I've only been in Texas for the last 15 plus years. And I was surprised when I got here and there were people who looked like me who had no knowledge about Juneteenth. When did you first learn about Juneteenth? How did you learn about it? And are there any myths and misconceptions that you have since found out? And how would you go about dispelling those?
You mean we only have an hour to talk about this? Let's see if we could give you the Cliff Note version. So, growing up in Texas, being seventh generation, with roots back to 1837, some of my earliest ancestors was here when Texas was a republic and an independent nation. So my family has always had these traditions and this oral history centered around Juneteenth. It was probably before I really became somewhat conscious of it. It's probably early 80s, because as a kid, you're just hanging out with your friends, you're getting some food, and maybe not paying attention to all the details of what the seniors are talking about. But for someone like my grandmother, who's in her 90s now, one of her childhood friends, attorney Faye Williams, they always spent the summers together. They lived in Galveston, but they would go to Brazoria in Brazoria County for the summers, and there will always be Juneteenth programs there. And attorney Williams says that as a child, her grandfather told her it wasn't a piece of paper that freed the enslaved people of Texas, but the men with the guns. And the men with the guns being the Union soldiers, many of them being United States colored troops that many people don't talk about. So when we think about Granger coming in on the 19th, there were individuals that had arrived in Texas, Union soldiers, earlier than that. The last Civil War battle was in South Texas. And then there were soldiers that were trying to go further south, ran into some bad weather, and had to come up to Galveston for supplies. So when Granger gets to Galveston, there are more soldiers there than he thought, many of them being USCT. So for me, one of the myths is that Granger kind of came into town, not just by itself, because they often say 2,000 soldiers with him, but there were thousands of other soldiers in the state of Texas, many of them being United States colored troops. And that's one of the things that I've worked actively to expand the narrative, not to take away from Gordon Granger being in charge of the state or Major Frederick Emory, but to make sure that these soldiers were included in the work to spread the message of freedom to the plantations further inland. And, whenever you're ready to talk about the growth of that enslaved population, we can go from the 5,000 in 1836 to 11,000 in 1840, 58,000 in 1850, 180,000 in 1860, and then over 250,000 by 1865. So we can dive into why that was, happening.
So you learned mostly about Juneteenth from the oral histories of family members, not necessarily in school?
Oh, I don't recall ever having any deep conversation, because one, Juneteenth is in the summer. So it's not like a program that you speak about during the year. Of course, you have Black History Month, but growing up in the 70s and 80s, you talked about Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and maybe Frederick Douglass. I mean, these are the iconic figures, limited. So, sometimes the teachers would tell us, okay, we're going to have Black History reports, but you cannot do a report on Dr. King, because everybody wanted to throw up their hand and say, oh, I got Martin Luther King. Well, everybody knew his history. There are so many other historical figures. Speaking of people, many of us know the Peanuts character Charlie Brown. Mm-hmm. But in Brazoria County in West Columbia, there was a gentleman named Charlie Brown, who was one of the first Black millionaires in the state of Texas that hosted Juneteenth events and always told his descendants to always host Juneteenth events. So he was a former enslaved individual born in the 1820s, I believe, that once he received his freedom, became a very wealthy individual, the largest landowner at one point in Brazoria County, and a very successful businessman. So those former enslaved individuals established over 500 freedom colonies. These are not necessarily cities, but Dr. Andrea Roberts has the Texas Freedom Colonies Project. So they built schools, businesses, churches, neighborhoods, and they tried to make the best of the limited opportunity, because we do realize that there was limited opportunity with that freedom, as Ed will speak to later with General Order Number 3, that it says you're free, but don't go anywhere. So there's two parts to that.
I'm going to bring in Ed here, even though I know we're going to have more time with you later. I'm glad that you mentioned the over 500 freedom colonies that once existed in Texas, because now in 2025, we can count fewer than 50 of them. And most of them are basically shells of whatever they were before. And we can definitely, that was an area where I was like, okay, I know I've come across this before, but I've never gone down the rabbit hole to figure out, although I can guess why those freedom colonies no longer exist, why they were decimated in the way that they were. But talking about myths, so Ed, are you trying to say that that image of General Granger riding in on a horse, flanked by these Union soldiers, and climbing the steps up to the building, I think it was the Ostrom building, and reading, and I guess they called everyone on their cell phones on all the plantations and told all of the enslaved Africans to show up, and they had to fight their masters and mistresses to come out, and they all gathered around the building, and he read this order number 3, and that's how everybody knew they were no longer enslaved. Are you saying that's not what happened?
It's unfortunately, it's really not. And it is funny. I mean, you literally will read some newspaper accounts that talk about General Granger riding into town, when in fact, of course, he came by ship. He walked about 2 blocks and set up shop in a building, the Osterman building. And then this whole part about him reading an order from a balcony, again, we have no evidence of that at all. And I'm glad that Sam mentioned, the men with guns, because I think that's really where we need to refocus this whole thing. Because Juneteenth was never really about a white officer reading an order from a balcony. Juneteenth was always about men showing up with guns that were now able to really enforce emancipation. Because, Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and that was well known down here, both by the enslavers and the enslaved people. That was known. What the reason it didn't mean anything was that there were no men with guns down here that were able to enforce emancipation. That would not happen until 1865, when the Union troops showed up. And that's why Juneteenth and the arrival of the occupation forces was so important.
So there you both go, busting myths again. So you're trying to say that the narrative that the enslaved Africans were so out of touch with everything, they knew nothing about the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. They were just completely ignorant of it. That's not true either?
That's not true at all. I mean, and again, I think we don't give them credit for having the intelligence and the ability to take advantage of what they did have available, which was, this incredible network of communication that, between themselves. And, it only took one person in the big house to listen in to the enslavers talking about the news of the day, to hear about the Emancipation Proclamation, which was in every newspaper, to pass that along. It only took one person in the community to know about what was going on in the news to pass that along. And they had a really fabulous network of communication that we don't give them credit for.
Okay, so again, I know Sam Collins, you have to leave shortly. I do want to quote from your book, Ed, and I want to get your response to this, Sam. So you wrote, neither military force that entered the conflict, talking about the Civil War, devised a coherent strategy for how to handle or interact with the slave population. As Union armies fought their way across the South, they were alternately hindered and helped by their interactions with a slave population that often outnumbered the armies in the field. Eventually, largely by virtue of necessity, the Union Army began to recruit the slaves it freed and brought them into the fold of military service. Black men in uniform fittingly played a large part in the final progress and outcome of the war. The question I have for you, to the extent that you're saying it's not enough to have a paper, it's not enough to have a proclamation, it took men with guns to enforce this proclamation, this notion that enslaved Africans were now free. Do you feel that the United States of America today in 2025 has finally figured out a coherent strategy for how to handle or interact with the descendants of those that were once enslaved?
Well, for me, we did the Absolute Equality mural in Galveston, which depicts the history from Esteban or Estevanico in 1528 to present day. So when you think about the words absolute equality, you would think equality would be enough. And absolute equality is not about every human being having equal result, but every human being having an equal opportunity to grow and develop into the very best version of him or herself without hurdles or barriers hindering that growth or development. So I believe there's still a fight for absolute equality for individuals in many different areas, not just along racial lines, for individuals to become the very best version of themselves. So when you think about these soldiers, former enslaved individuals that ran away to Union camps and joined the military, not only did they take their physical bodies, but they also took their intellect and their knowledge of the South. So individuals that were in border states, once they joined the Union Army, they could offer intel that maybe the Union would not have had if it had not been for what at the time they were considered contraband. Benjamin Butler made the decision when a Confederate officer asked him to return 3 runaway slaves because of the fugitive slave law, that you are a foreign nation, you're the Confederate States of America, so you are not under our Constitution, so therefore we don't have to return them. And with that news, as Ed has already said, as news spread, if you make it to the camp, you could possibly be free. More people voted with their feet and start running away in border states. Also in Galveston, Ed has an excellent book about the Battle of Galveston. But prior to the Battle of Galveston in the fall of '62, the Union had control of the port city of Galveston. When they took captives or prisoners of war, any of those individual servants or men there that were part of the Union, the Black soldiers, sailors, individuals were sold into slavery. So them being there with the knowledge of the Emancipation Proclamation, once they got sold to a plantation, they would have been sharing news and information hey, I was in Galveston, I was part of this, I came from the East Coast, wherever they came, they would have been sharing information. So their intellect was also very important in the battles and in the Union eventually achieving a victory. So, and I'm going to stay a little bit longer because we're having such good conversation. And, the thing is, if you're the brightest light in the room, you need to go into another room. So now that I'm here to learn from Ed, I'm just going to sit and listen. I'm going to sit and listen while the teacher teaches the student.
Okay, one last question. Well, not last question, but one more question for you, Sam, because I'm not sure when you're going to leave. But I did want to ask this question. So I actually live in Belton, Texas, and not even a 10-minute drive from my home, there is a Confederate soldier, a monument to a Confederate soldier that was strategically placed in front of the courthouse and actually facing the direction where most of the African Americans at that time, in that period, lived in the area. And in the years that I've been here, we've had different movements, if you will, to try and get that Confederate monument taken down. I did read somewhere that you bought and refurbished a home that used to be owned by a Confederate soldier. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to do that and why you still have that Confederate soldier's name attached to that home? I know that it's completely repurposed for a different reason, but for some people who would say, well, is that not akin to still in keeping with the lost cause, giving credit and if you will, honor to people who fought against our rights to live as free human beings? Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that effort and what your response would be?
Yeah, Maya Angelou has a quote: "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." So when we think about these spaces that we live in, that we occupy today, that others occupied before us, these spaces and places take on the energy of those that own them. So we can repurpose these locations. And when you dive a little bit deeper into the history of an individual like Henry Martin Stringfellow, who was the Confederate soldier that owned the property after the war was over, and he fought in the Battle of Galveston. So that was one of the things that he was a part of when the Confederate Army took back control of Galveston Island. But something I learned about Mr. Stringfellow is after the Civil War, he had an orchard. He was a world-renowned horticulturist, and he moved his business to Hitchcock. And at that location, he had 30 Black men that worked for him. And when wages were only 50 cents per day, he paid all of his workers, all 30 Black men, $1 a day each, therefore offering them economic opportunity to earn twice as much as they were getting paid at other farms. In an environment with convict leasing, in an environment of exploitation, I often say Stringfellow took the high road because the low road was crowded. So here was a former soldier that could have tried to exploit these men that chose to pay them. And the economic impact of that is still being felt today by some descendants that still own property that was purchased with money earned at Stringfellow Orchards in Hitchcock. So for me, there was a great debate about taking down names and statues. But what I've attempted to do is expand the narrative to tell more of the history and story. So I often use the analogy of a green salad. Most of the stories that we've heard are the lettuce and tomato stories of founding fathers, early settlers. But this history salad includes croutons, bacon bits, olives, pickles, onions, other ingredients. And as we expand the narrative to talk about those workers at the location, like Frank Bell that worked for Stringfellow, to talk about Charlie Brown, to talk about other individuals that were part of this history, we're flavoring up the history. And for some people, they just like lettuce and tomatoes. But I think if individuals are introduced to an expanded narrative, they'll get a better understanding of the complex history. And the reason we study that history is to make sure we don't make the mistakes of the past.
Thank you very much for that. So Ed, I'm going to come back to you with the question that I'd asked when I had quoted your book. You had indicated that neither the Union or the Confederacy seemed to have had a structured plan for what they were going to do or how they were going to deal with the enslaved Africans. Do you feel that today the country is still grappling with what do we do with the descendants of enslaved Africans? What is your take on it as we celebrate Juneteenth?
Yes, I think we're still on the road. I mean, Sam and I have talked about this for a long time. Let me just give you an example. I have given tours down there in Galveston for going on 27 years now. And every January I give tours for the Battle of Galveston. And the Battle of Galveston is a battle where the Confederates won. And it's the only battle where the Confederates ever recaptured a city, a port city that the Union had captured. And I give these tours, and the tour groups are predominantly white tourists. That's just the nature of the people that take those tours. And as I would go by a particular location there at 22nd and Strand, I would always mention that at this particular place, today a parking lot, stood a building called the Osterman Building. And this is where one of the most important events in Texas history happened. This is where General Orders Number 3 was issued. This was the famous Juneteenth order was issued. And many of my tourists would say, June what? They had no idea what that was. And even the occasional black tourists that I would have there, many of those people either did not know what Juneteenth was if they had come from out of state, or even if they knew about the event, they really didn't know what had happened there, what the historical basis of the event was. And it was unfortunate that we didn't even have a historic marker there to indicate what that was. And finally, an individual came forth and sponsored a historic marker there. And it was a gentleman who at the time I did not know. And it was a guy who I got to know very well. He's become a good friend of mine, and it was Sam Collins. And if you'll notice, Sam is pictured in my book there at the end because he's kind of become one of my personal heroes for sponsoring that marker there to help place that in there. But in addition to putting that historic marker there, Sam helped sponsor a mural that is there on the side of a building. It's a giant mural that quotes from the Juneteenth order, a sentence that quotes the language absolute equality. And that language is in the Juneteenth order. Now, when that language was put in that order in 1863, we were so far away from absolute equality, it wasn't funny. And the people that were liberated from slavery in 1865, the concept of absolute equality to them was just basically almost a joke. But it was an aspiration, and they were taking the very, very, very first steps along a road that might eventually lead to absolute equality. And to me, I think we're still on that road. We're a long, long way from having absolute equality. And it's not just, black and white people. It's people of all colors and every different religion. We're just a long way from having absolute equality in this country. It's a goal and an aspiration, and something that we all need to work at hard every single day. We haven't reached that goal. We're a long way away, but it's something that we need to work on constantly.
Thank you for sharing that. So can you tell us a little bit more about this order? There were many orders that were issued during the Civil War. What is it about order number 3? And what are the things that you think people may not know about the order and should know, or areas where maybe they're not really focusing on some of the language in the order?
Well, Sam mentioned this earlier. I think most people, if you read about the Juneteenth order in June of 1865, you read about it every year. They just quote the first line, which is that it says all slaves are free. but actually the order consists of 4 sentences. It does have the first sentence that says all slaves are free, but the last 2 sentences say that although you're free to stay exactly where you are and keep working for the same person who had enslaved you, doing the same thing, and basically will just call you an employee now. You're working for wages. Don't come to the city. Don't come to the military for any kind of support. You just stay where you are. Now you're an employee, but you're basically a slave in everything but name. And so you're free-ish. And so it's kind of an embarrassing thing to read those last 2 lines. And although this order is associated with Gordon Granger, he didn't really write either that first sentence or those last 2 sentences. Those were dictated to him by General Phil Sheridan over in New Orleans. And General Sheridan and General Ulysses Grant were terrified that General Granger was going to get over here to Galveston and say something that was going to end up in the northern newspapers that would embarrass them. So they basically dictated to him, when you get to Galveston, say all slaves are free, but tell all the enslaved people to stay right where they are and don't cause a scene for right now. And so that's why those particular 3 sentences ended up in the order. Unbeknownst to them, General Granger had a staff officer named Frederick Emory, and Frederick Emory was an abolitionist newspaper editor from Kansas. And Emory was a brilliant guy. He actually had been a member of a Kansas cavalry company that had been captained by John Brown, the martyr's son. So he was really anti-slavery very intensely.
Okay, hold on. For those of you who didn't catch that quickly, he just dropped John Brown. You might want to go down that rabbit trail to understand who John Brown was and how much fear he put in the hearts of many slave owners and those who didn't own slaves. Northerners were really terrified of him as well. But please carry on.
So this is John Brown of Harper's Ferry fame. This is the guy that before the outbreak of the Civil War had tried to start the slave revolt at Harper's Ferry. And so everybody was terrified of this guy. And that guy's son had ended up in part of the Kansas, Bloody Kansas campaign over there. And he had started a cavalry unit. And these men that joined it, including Frederick Emory, would hold meetings and they would sing, John Brown's hymn and recite that they were all going to abolish slavery. And Frederick Emory was one of these men. And so when he got the chance at the end of the war, he slipped in this sentence in General Orders number 3 about absolute equality and what freedom meant. Absolute equality between former masters and former slaves. And it's just beautiful language that's not in any of the other orders. It's not in the Emancipation Proclamation. It's really, really beautiful language. And it's something special. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Juneteenth order has such special meaning to us today. And it's the reason that we call that mural on the side of the building absolute equality today.
Thank you. So for both of you, it seems like, I think you would agree with me, that there's a lot of miseducation and maybe downright ignorance, just not even knowledge about Juneteenth. What are the ways, in addition to your book, that you are helping to get the real message of Juneteenth out? And why is that important today, given the fact that both of you have talked about this evolution and we're on the road? I think that some of us, me included, myself included, will say it looks like we're taking some giant steps backwards as opposed to this forward movement. So what are the ways that you are educating people about Juneteenth? What are some of the things that you want people to kind of tap into?
Well, in Galveston, at the corner that Ed speaks about, 22nd and Strand, the southwest corner, that is what I term our outdoor classroom. So you have the historical marker, subject marker from the Texas Historical Commission. You have the mural, which was sponsored by many individuals and seed funded by Sheridan Loren's Mitchell descendant, George and Cynthia Mitchell, one of their daughters. She seed funded the project, and the Juneteenth Legacy Project committee worked on that together. On the historical marker, I gathered a group of individuals to donate toward that. So none of us do this work alone. And there are docents, there are what we call memory keepers, there are tour guides like Ed and others that are working to expand the narrative of this history. So not only do you learn that history on the marker and the mural, we have augmented reality where you can download an app, uncover everything, and then scan the mural. It'll even work if you pull up the mural on your computer and you take the app and scan the image on your computer, or if you're standing in the parking lot, the technology doesn't recognize if you're standing in the parking lot or you're sitting in your home. It just simply recognizes the image, and then videos pop up. There's also an art gallery, what we call the Neocultural Center Juneteenth Legacy Project.
I've been there. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so these classrooms outside of the school buildings are very important. Museums, art galleries, cultural centers are filling in the gaps to fix the foundation of our history narrative. And to your point, we're not guaranteed to take steps forward if we don't teach the history. We can take steps backwards. So that's why I'm saying we don't teach this history to live in the past. You know, growing up, I made the mistake of not listening when someone told me something was hot, and I ended up touching it. And when I touched it, of course, I got burned, and I immediately learned what was hot. Now, I don't want to forget that experience, nor do I want to live in that moment. But if I was to erase my history or erase my memory, I run the risk of making that mistake again because I wouldn't have the experience of touching something hot. So while I don't want to live in the moment of that pain of the burn, I also want to remember what hot means so that I don't burn myself again. So when we talk about the mistakes of the past in our history, we learn from the successes, we learn from the accomplishment, but we also learn from the mistake. We can learn from our own mistakes, or it's wiser to learn from the mistakes of others so that you don't make it. But that's why we teach this history, and that's why we work to expand the narrative of our shared history.
Anything you would like to add to that, Ed?
No, I think Sam put it exactly right.
Okay, so I have another question for you, Ed. One of the things I feel is a misconception is, you know, Abraham Lincoln in many quarters is known as the great emancipator. That's not how I read him in history, although I'm very grateful for the Emancipation Proclamation and some of the roles that he played. You talk a little bit about, well, quite a bit about Abraham Lincoln and what I would term as the problem with Lincoln, the emancipator. How do you see him? How do you read him through history?
You know, I guess you're a lawyer like I am. I genuinely think that if Lincoln had had his way, he would have emancipated all of the enslaved people. He said on many occasions that he had always thought slavery was wrong. I think that was his natural inclination. But I also think that Lincoln was convinced that as a legal matter, this was an issue of state law, and that just going back to the formation of the Union, only the states could address that issue, that the federal government just did not have the constitutional power to eliminate slavery. And that, you know, a lot of people had advanced this argument about, well, military necessity had made the federal government able to do it, but he really, as a lawyer, did not trust that issue. And that's why he held off as long as he did on doing something about slavery. And then I think also another reason he held off on doing anything on the Emancipation Proclamation was that he was afraid in the early parts of the war that if he did something on emancipation, that he would drive the border states, and in particular Kentucky, over into the Southern camp. And that if he drove Kentucky over into the Southern camp, that would drive too many people over into the Southern camp, and that he would be unable to win the war as a military matter. And I don't think I could second guess him on that. I think early in the war he had really legitimate concerns about that. And then you've also got to consider the fact that over on the Supreme Court at the time, you had the original people who had decided the Dred Scott decision, which was the worst decision in American history. And his old adversary, Roger Taney, over there was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that if he did anything on slavery, it was likely to get a very negative review from one of the worst justices in American history. So I can understand why he held off as a legal matter and as a military matter doing anything on slavery for as long as he did. And then I can understand why when he finally went ahead and did something, he did it in the very legalistic kind of patchwork way that he ended up doing it. But it still was it was a terrible way to go about emancipating people, and it ended up having some very negative consequences, as I point out in the book.
Yes, certainly. And unfortunately, because I could have this conversation with y'all for 3 more hours at least. I have so many notes from your book. I do encourage people to go and read about every single person that we've mentioned, and then you'll find more rabbit holes to go down. Because my reading of Abraham Lincoln and some comments he made in other places, basically believing in the superiority of white people over Black people, I just see how historically in this country there have always been compromises made. And I would say compromises made on the backs of Black people. And part of what I would say to our listeners, wherever you fall along the quote unquote racial spectrum, even though we know that is a social construct, is to see what role you're playing in continuing to kick the can down the road, if you will, for absolute equality for everybody.
Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that Abraham Lincoln was believed that Black people and white people were equal. He did not. And he was in favor, if he was in favor of eliminating slavery, he was also in favor of repatriating Blacks to other places. So
yes,
he was not at all advanced in his thinking along racial lines at all. But my belief is that he did it. He was in favor of eliminating slavery. That's all I was trying to say.
I
want to drop something else in here for you. You may not know, and there's another rabbit hole you can go down later. One of the first slaves that Abraham Lincoln freed, and really was more like an indentured servant, was a woman named Nance Leggins Costley in 1841 when he was a young attorney. Mm-hmm. Many people don't know the work that he did as a young attorney to help her, and they don't realize that she had an infant son at the time, William Costley, who grew up, joined the 29th Infantry, the United States Colored Troops or whatever, and was in Galveston around the time of Juneteenth in 1865. So here's a woman in 1841 that had an infant child that grew up, joined the Union Army and fought on the Union side, and happened to be in Galveston in 1865 after Lincoln had already been assassinated. Mm-hmm. So when we think about the history that is made up, these mythical figures and stories about standing on a balcony, I think the real stories are more powerful. If you imagine, Hollywood eventually, and I'm probably giving away a story here, they show Lincoln working with this woman. She has a baby, an infant child, small, and then he grows up and becomes a freedom fighter and soldier in a United States Colored Troop. That's an amazing story that he would fight for freedom later on. And I don't even know if he knew that connection to the president as well. But that's a real story.
So do either one of you have any last comments that you would like to make as we close up, unfortunately? But again, people, you can find these men. They have lots of videos on YouTube, lots of interviews, their books. you can go to Galveston, go and be part of that history yourself. Any last comments from you, Ed?
I would just say, and I'm sure Sam would join me in this, if you want to experience Juneteenth, the best way to do that is to come to Ground Zero, come down to Galveston, come to the corner of 22nd and Strand, read the historical marker there, see the absolute equality mural, come around Galveston and see the places where the Juneteenth order was posted, like the Reedy Chapel site there on Broadway. It's a wonderful city, and there's a lot of history there. Take one of the Freedom Walks with people like Sam. It's an amazing place, and the best way to get to see Juneteenth is to come to Galveston.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to be in Galveston this week. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on what Ed said, and I tell people you could read about Juneteenth in Ed's excellent book or other books on Juneteenth. You can listen to a program like this about Juneteenth. You could watch a documentary about Juneteenth, one which I produced, Juneteenth, The Galveston Story. But it's like reading about swimming or watching a film on swimming. At some point, you have to get in the water. So when you visit Galveston, you are in the Juneteenth water. You will be immersed in the story and place where Juneteenth was birthed. So we invite you to Galveston, Texas, the birthplace of Juneteenth.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I cannot express my gratitude enough. Truly an honor to talk with you. Ed, incredible book. Your detail and just the history beyond what we typically get is amazing. I'm looking forward to reading your other books. Hopefully I get to meet you both at some point. And thank you so much for being our guests here on Rethinking Freedom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for listening and watching. And as promised, there are Juneteenth events that are happening right here in Central Texas, where I'm based. And I wanted to bring some people on who could share in detail some of these events, because you want to be in attendance. Let's not just say we are fighting for our liberation. Let's not just say this holiday is important and yet not do anything to actually support it and to advance our objectives. You just having a day off and sitting at home and eating is not what it's about. So with me today is Tanika Driver Moultrie. If you are in Central Texas, if you're in Killeen, where I'm kind of based, you know this name, because from the day that I stepped into this area 15 plus years ago, she's been fighting at the forefront. And let me tell you something that sometimes we don't recognize. Unless you have been ever in the forefront fighting, you don't understand how exhausting it is. You don't understand how much criticism you get. And nobody is ever going to agree with you. Sometimes I don't agree with her. But what I do appreciate is she's never given up the fight that I've seen. You are always out there trying to make a difference. She is the president of the Killeen chapter NAACP, and she's going to share with us a little bit about what we are doing in our community for Juneteenth and anything else that you would like our viewers and our listeners to know. Welcome to Rethinking Freedom.
Thank you for having me, Aya, and thank you for the invitation. And I want to personally thank you for all you do for not just our community, but this nation as a whole, with self-love, showing us about what it's like to, show that we are doing that each and every day. So thank you for all that you do. Here in Central Texas, we are going to be celebrating Juneteenth festivities coming up here very, very soon. And not just the NAACP is doing events, but there are other entities and organizations doing events as well. And I just want to say kudos to them as well, because we need to be bringing this celebration, this historic history that has happened in our nation, to the forefront, and everyone needs to be a part of it now more than ever because of the climate of our environment. Yeah. And so we want everyone to participate, not just for those who are of African American culture, but everyone to participate and understand the significance and the importance behind the Juneteenth celebration. So getting to it, here in Killeen, for the NAACP NAACP, we will be having the Miss Juneteenth pageant, and that will be on Friday, June 20th. We are also going to be doing something on Juneteenth, and it's going to be small, but it's actually a big thing that we're going to be doing, and that is our Community Impact Day. So on June 19th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., unfortunately, we were stricken with a huge, a negative situation here in Central Texas at one of our middle schools. And so this has caused us, of course, to make some changes. And we are fine with those changes, but we want to make sure that our young people are set up to go back to school, to have those clear backpacks and those mesh backpacks. So anyone in our community who wants to participate and to give some backpacks for our young people to have those, especially those families in need, we will be collecting those at Starbucks locations throughout Central Texas. So
Woo!
there are 5 locations that we are going to be at, and different organizations and entities will be there as well. We'll also be there celebrating Juneteenth on Juneteenth. So people are attendees, participants are able to come, and partake in some food, fun, and of course, fellowship, but most importantly, the educational piece of it. So that is the first thing that we will be starting off by doing. Again, anyone that wants to donate, whether it's with the backpacks or financially, monetary, we're more than willing to go shop for those for you. But Killeen ISD has mandated that all of the campuses, all elementary, middle, and high school, have those clear backpacks and those mesh backpacks. So let's come together as a community and make an impact on Juneteenth by doing just that. Again, on the 20th, we will have the pageant where we have 7 beautiful young ladies who will be competing for the title of Miss Juneteenth, as well as the opportunity to receive a $1,000 scholarship. And so we are very excited for that event that will be taking place on June 20th at 6:30 p.m. at the Killeen Arts and Activities Center in downtown Killeen. And then we will be wrapping up our Juneteenth festivities with our Juneteenth parade. This parade this year is very special for us. Mr. Billy Sneed, who is no longer with us, who passed away in June, started the Billy Sneed Parade. And so we are going to commemorate and honor this parade for his life and the legacy that he has left behind. Mr. Billy Sneed was truly a phenomenal trailblazer here in our community. So we will be having that parade Saturday at 10 a.m. in downtown Killeen. Lineup is at 9 a.m. You don't need to sign up. You don't need to pay an entry fee. We just all want everyone to come together and come participate in the Billy Sneed Juneteenth Parade. And so those are the events that we have at the NAACP. As I stated before, there are other entities, organizations that are having Juneteenth festivities, celebrations, and I just encourage our entire community, from the youngest of young to the oldest of old, to participate in this celebration.
Because if we don't teach ourselves our own history, who's going to do it? So
Absolutely.
Is there a website or social media link or anything where people can go to get more information?
Yes, ma'am. So on our Facebook page, Killeen NA branch NAACP, it can go on there, and there are 3 flyers. We've also put out information as well through the newspaper, and so they are able to get the information there on our Facebook page. That's the best place, and my number is listed on the flyer. So if anyone has any questions, or needing additional information, are more than welcome to give me a call. And they'll get a live person.
They'll get a live person.
Always important.
I just wanted to say this to you. I did not know that the parade had been named after Billy Sneed, but thank you all, whoever made that decision. Billy Sneed was such a community person.
Yes, ma'am.
He, I'm an attorney. He was also my client. He was my mentor. And I had just spoken to him like a week before his transition. And when I spoke with him, he was on his way. Billy Sneed was in his 80s. He was on his way with his trailer to go and pick up food from one location and then distributed to these different churches that gave out food to senior citizens who were struggling, food insecurity. And so this man literally was working for our community till the last moment.
Yes.
Absolutely selfless. If there was anything that benefited the community and you reached out to him, he was writing a check. He was showing up in person. Very, someone who just wanted to uplift other people. Of course, a veteran. And so thank you for keeping his memory alive in this way. And I hope that people are inspired to go learn about this man who's a legend in my mind.
Yes, he is truly one of our unsung heroes, and he is actually on the forefront of our flyer. And so we had him, he participated last year. He does every year. But we just wanted to take the opportunity to honor and celebrate his life and his legacy. And as you stated, he was truly a trailblazer here in our community. And so those of you that did not get the opportunity to meet him, he was just one of the many African-American selfless individuals who really poured into his community, really, truly did. So, yes, ma'am.
And that's how we got our liberation, and that's how we're going to keep it. So thank you so much for all that you do. And y'all, that Juneteenth pageant is amazing. The talent you're going to see. You want to take younger kids so that they can be inspired as to what they can strive for, what they can accomplish. Every piece. And of course, we absolutely need those bags. So please, if you are able to buy additional mesh bags, additional clear bags, be part of the solution is what I'm saying. Be part of it. Don't just stay on the sidelines complaining, pointing fingers, tearing down people who are doing their best to do some work. Be part of the solution. Thank you so much, Ms. Driver Moultrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aya. Have a great day.
You too. There are so many events that are taking place in our community here in Central Texas. Please visit the Facebook page for the Innovation Black Chamber of Commerce, because there is a Unity 5K race on the 21st. There is a Juneteenth festival at 205 East Avenue D in Killeen. There is another Juneteenth festival at the East Center from 3 to 8 p.m. on the 21st as well. Of course, all of the activities that Tanika Driver Moultrie just shared with you. Please engage with all of these. Take the young ones. We must learn our history. We must pass it on. The schools aren't going to do it for us. And thank you for watching Rethinking Freedom.